What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Deborah YouTube channel. I'm your host, Kevin Coleman, and we're back with another Dynasty price check. And what we like to do on this is look at one player and what their value is right now. It's a quick, actionable takeaway from one player in Dynasty Leagues. I know some of you guys play with trade deadlines. If you still do that, I don't know what the hell you're doing. But if you don't play with trade deadlines, we're still going to give you guys some value, some players in the next couple of weeks that you can maybe go out and get. But we're going to be looking at Baltimore wide receiver Zay Flowers. What do we expect from him moving forward? Is he getting overvalued based on the production that we have seen from him, right? When we're looking at yards and that production and fantasy finishes, it looks like he's getting a little bit overvalued in the dynasty realm, in the dynasty market, but maybe not based on some of the deals that we're going to go through. Actionable takeaways, actionable deals. That's what we do here on this channel. So hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll dive into Zay on the other side. All right, let's get into Zay Flowers. And again, it's funny because when I talk about Zay on this show, especially this episode, some people are gonna be like, "Oh, he didn't like Zay. He's a hater." Those type of things. That is not the case. Like Zay was one of those guys coming in as I do college football in Devy format. If you followed me for a long time, Zay was one of those guys that I loved 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Zay's been my guy, and so when he got drafted by the Ravens, I was a little concerned, but I did like that Todd Monken came in, and hey, okay, maybe they're going to utilize him, and I think they have in a way, but we haven't seen that necessarily that breakout, right? So when you're looking at a season in a snapshot, through right now, through these 12 weeks, wide receiver 33 in standard, wide receiver 28 and half PPR, and then wide receiver 25 in PPR, right? So he's averaging about 11.9 fantasy points per game. And when you go through just the game log, and we're talking overall, like what we see from him, right? His weekly finishes in PPR, which is where he's going to probably be the highest value just based on the targets that we see, 6 is his best finish in the last 6-7 weeks. Outside of that, 14 and 16 are his other two. Like the issue for Zay and the big problem that we see with Zay Flowers is that he's getting the usage, he's getting the targets. We see that the receptions have been there, but the production, the yards after catch, the things that we expected him to kind of do at the next level, we just haven't seen that very much, right? A lot of scheme touches and wide receiver screens, which is something I highlighted in a Lamar Jackson piece that I wrote for Football Guys that you're going to see in this offense, but we haven't seen that big playability. Now, they did get him in the rushing game this last game. He had that 37-yard touchdown run, but that's more of an outlier, right? We haven't seen them use him that way. He does have, in terms of his rushes all year, 8 rushes. So, I think that's the biggest concern is that, what we've seen from him is great. He's earning the targets and we see that. But the production side and the fantasy production, he's a very good piece in this offense, but we just haven't seen the fantasy production. I think we're still based on the values and where people are valuing him. We're expecting him to, obviously explode this offense, be that true wide receiver one on that depth chart. But that hasn't been the case right now, right? Now, when we think of dynasty outlook, I do think from an offensive scheme perspective, you have to love where he is at because they're using him and you're having that usage and those wide receiver screens, the quick outs, the quick slants, all that stuff is perfect. Like that's exactly what you want if you're like, hey, I have him rostered because he's going to get used. And unlike what we've seen with like Quentin Johnston and all these different types of, underperforming wide receivers, even like JSN. I love Jackson Smith-Njigba, but if we're talking like legitimate, hey, what's going on with him in terms of like his usage, it's just not there, right? He makes 2 great catches, they don't go back to him. And Baltimore has been using him. So again, everything's in perspective here on what we expect. Like I like him in this role. I think he fits a role. Rashad Bateman can't stay healthy. OBJ's been okay. Nelson Aguilar's not nothing like, incredible. So when we're thinking of like dynasty outlook, can Zay be a wide receiver on this team? Sure. I think they can. I do think that an offensive rhythm is coming, but you also have to remember, they might go out and get a running back next year. Maybe they go target another wide receiver and really build around this offense. Mark Andrews is hurt. So, hey, we should see a little bit bump in Zay, but when Andrews comes back, he is that true tight end one. We saw it likely kind of get a role there. Charlie Kohler is going to get a role there. Maybe they go out and add to that room. So, like, there is going to be competition always in this offense. And the way this offense is utilized it is going to get spread around a lot, right? It's not going to be just dominant. Hey, we're going to go like we seen with CeeDee Lamb right now with Dak. It's not just that. This offense is a whole lot different. And so that is something to take into account. We need Zay Flowers to produce from a yards perspective and definitely from that touchdown perspective, right? So I think I like the role. I like the scheme. I don't necessarily know if I like the value. So when you look at Dynasty Outlook, his value's kind of gone up and down. He definitely had his big bump up last month, especially when, people were really excited because of the targets. When we're talking about the targets that he has seen, in that time when he probably had the best around the Pittsburgh week 5, week 6, week 4 in that area. I mean, you're looking at almost 25 and then 33 targets in 4 games. That's exciting, right? The last 3 games, we've seen it go down to 18 targets. And again, so he's kind of across the board. We can't really trust his usage all the time. And that's what we've seen. Now, as far as like dynasty trades and where they're going. So right now on Keep Trade Cut, he's wide receiver 17, which is pretty fairly high when we're thinking of like where he's finished, right? He's only had 2 top 14 finishes, a 6 and a 14. Like, if that's the case, why is he still getting, wide receiver 17 numbers? And we saw where he has finished there. I understand that dynasty rankings is more about, whatever the case may be, whether you believe in dynasty rankings or not. Like, I really think it should be clusters or matrices. It shouldn't be necessarily just flat number rankings. Like, where he's getting ranked at that number, like he's around Stephon Diggs, Jordan Addison, Brandon Ayuk. He's ahead of JSN, Michael Pittman, who technically I think Michael Pittman's getting slept on. DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Drake London. He's in that tier. We haven't seen that kind of, level of output, right? Like, I would still buy JSN's talent. Now, as far as like where he's at, Football Guys is wide receiver 21, wide receiver 20 at the TDR here. Some deals for Superflex, Zay Flowers in the second for Stephon Diggs. That's definitely a rebuild or contender. I like that deal for both sides. Zay Flowers for Brandon Ayuk. I just put Brandon Ayuk in my top 10 in terms of my dynasty wide receivers. He's 25. And when you're thinking of like, in that usage, 2 or 3 elite years from Brandon Ayuk as compared to Zay Flowers, I think they're pretty similar profile from a dynasty outlook perspective. But I think Ayuk can, yes, we've seen the production at least, right? But also just from the upside perspective for the next 2 years, I think you can win more with Ayuk on your roster rather than Zay. Flowers and Gibson for a first and a third, Flowers and Downs for Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper. I love that side for Downs and Flowers. Even if I was a contender, especially this year with the Deshaun injury and then with Cooper Kupp kind of being banged up, I actually like going down with Downs and Flowers, just kind of rolling with that one. Flowers in a second for Kelsey. I think that's interesting. If you're tied in a way or you feel like, hey, I can go get Kelsey down the stretch and go try to win my dynasty league, that might not be a bad deal to make. I don't recommend giving up, Zay Flowers for Kelsey unless you really are in top 3 of points and you can go get it. Flowers and Eckler, I think that's interesting. I always kind of lean wide receiver in these deals. And Eckler has not looked like himself since he's been injured. And then Flowers and a first for Jared Goff in Superflex. So these are all Superflex values. That is interesting, trying to basically get Flowers and a first. I hate giving up an asset like Goff, who is a very solid QB2, for a wide receiver that we've seen kind of the numbers that we've seen from him and an unknown in that first. So if you maybe need a quarterback and you're willing to kind of give up this, that could be an option. Now, in one quarterback, we're seeing, pretty interesting deal. Zay Flowers for Christian Watson in a second. Josh Jacobs, Zay Flowers for Amon-Ra. That's a great tier up. If you can go get Amon-Ra same round for Jacobs and Flowers in one quarterback dynasty, I think you have to do that. Flowers and Williams for Jonathan Taylor in a second. Flowers for Traylon Burks and T. Higgins. Zay Flowers for Jameson Williams in a second. I like Zay there as much as I like Jameson. I don't think the second really puts it over the top for me. Flowers in Montgomery. I think Monty is a very safe bet as that running back 2 solid. If you need that safer floor, especially if you're a contender, I understand that side. Flowers in a first for Stephon Diggs in a one quarterback. I know the first kind of lessen in value than it is in Superflex. So maybe that's why in Superflex he's only worth a second in Zay Flowers. But that is interesting. And then Flowers for Chris Godwin. So those are the values going around. So in terms of the appropriate values, I think, for me, when I was going into like trying to figure out what player to do for this, I think Flowers is just one of those guys. It's fascinating because I do believe in his talent. I think he has great usage, and I do think he has a role in this offense. They've created a role, and like we always talk about on a dynasty show for Football Guys, I want to see the coaches that have drafted these guys and will create a role and have an ideal role, right? Rashad Bateman always scared me because he didn't get drafted by this offensive coordinator. What is his role? What are we looking for, right, in a wide receiver? Flowers has done that. So he checks that box for me. We know he's going to get the targets. He checks that box for me. I think we just need to see that production side go up. And then I think he will solidify. But like for me, what is Zay Flowers' ceiling? Is it a wide receiver 12, 11, or is he going to be basically wide receiver 16 to 24, which is fine, but I think he's getting overvalued a little bit in dynasty markets, and I think we're valuing like, hey, projection wise, but we've been wrong before in projection. That doesn't mean I don't like Zay. If you can get it for the right price, like I just mentioned, some of those deals, I'm all about it. But I think there is a little bit more risk than people are baking in for Zay Flowers. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. What are you there? Have made some moves there? We'll probably do one of these dynasty price checks as the season kind of wraps up the regular season of fantasy. And then we can talk about outlooks and things like that. So appreciate you guys. Hit that like button. I'll see you later.